Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. The topic of this webinar is American Samoa's Solar+Storage Microgrid. This webinar is a presentation of Clean Energy Group's Resilient Power Project. Our host for this webinar is Seth Mullendore. Seth is a project director for the Resilient Power Project. And we have some excellent guest speakers with us today from the American Samoa Power Authority, from SolarCity, and from the EPA. We're very excited about this webinar. Before I pass it over to our speakers and our host, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our participants for this webinar are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of this webinar. You can either call in using a telephone, or you can connect using a computer mic and speakers. A very important note, please submit your questions as you think of them throughout the webinar by typing them into the question box on your webinar console and hitting send. We will save some time for a Q&A at the end of the webinar, and we'd like to get to as many questions as we can. So to make sure that we can get to your question, please type it in as you think of it. Don't wait until the very end of the webinar to submit your question. And a final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you a copy of the webinar recording via email after the webinar, and you'll also be able to find it on our website at resilient-power.org. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for this webinar, Seth Mullendore.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'd just like to give you a quick background about Clean Energy Group and the Resilient Power Project. Bringing you the webinar today. So Clean Energy Group is a national nonprofit. We are supported by a number of foundations that are listed here. The Resilient Power Project is one of our main initiatives. It's been in operation for about 3 years now, and the focus of the Resilient Power Project is to bring cleaner, more reliable, resilient energy to communities. Specifically, we focus on low-income and otherwise disadvantaged communities. Sam, if you could go to the next slide, please. We do this through providing a lot of public information, doing reports and analysis around resilient power systems. Specifically, we focus on solar combined with energy storage. A lot of this is around resiliency applications, both to provide power when there are grid outages, as well as economic resiliency, so providing economic savings, revenue opportunities through providing grid services, and similar programs, in addition to health benefits of bringing renewable energy and energy storage into these communities. We have a focus specifically on bringing these systems to affordable housing and critical public facilities, such as emergency shelters, healthcare facilities, first responders, and things like that. We work at all different levels. We work at the federal level. Particularly, we focus, though, on state level, looking at policies, and then local levels and working in specific communities. We do provide some technical assistance, both high-level technical and financial assistance, as well as some small grant opportunities to specific projects to help them understand the technical and financial feasibility of resilient power projects. A lot of our resources, actually all of our resources, such as webinars like this, reports, and newsletters can be found on our website, resilient-power.org. We've recently added to the website, which is shown on the next slide. We've added a new feature that is toolkits aimed at community projects and affordable housing projects. They have a compilation of our resources and other resources that are available for those that are interested in exploring resilient power more, the technologies behind it, financing, and how to develop and put together a resilient power project. So with that, I would like to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. Very excited to have 3 great speakers with us. First up, we are going to have Edna Noga. She is with the American Samoa Power Authority, and she recently returned to American Samoa after working in the Seattle area doing community building and education work for the last 10 years. As a staff engineer, too, she provides technical and project management support to several ongoing projects at the Power Authority. In this role, she is responsible for promoting their science, technology, and engineering Math Education Initiative, their STEM initiative, providing project management support as well as performing electrical system assessments and designs under the guidance of senior engineers. She's currently a member of the American Samoa Renewable Energy Committee, a board member of the newly formed Local 350 Club, and chairperson for the American Samoa STEM Partners Group. We also have with us Tristan Glenwright from SolarCity. Tristan leads the Microgrid project development efforts at SolarCity, which couples the company's strong solar heritage with energy storage and controls technologies to implement microgrid projects worldwide. In this role, he is responsible for business strategy, go-to-market planning, strategic partnership development, technology stack definition, and end-to-end project oversight. He is currently engaged in benchmark microgrid projects in the Caribbean, South Pacific, and continental U.S., including high renewable energy products with 80 to 100% of the load served by renewable generation. His broad experience allows innovative and holistic solutions to be developed, and previously Tristan was the head of Microgrid's new business venture at Boeing. And we also have with us Trina Martynowicz. Sorry if I got that wrong, Trina, at the EPA. Trina has a diverse professional background that spans a wide range of environmental areas at the Environmental Protection Agency. She currently works at the EPA's Pacific Southwest region in San Francisco, supporting projects, partnerships, and policies to reduce criteria pollutant and greenhouse gas emissions, such as converting methane into electricity and renewable natural gas to be used as a transportation fuel. She works with low-income rural communities to help them reduce their dependence on fossil fuel electricity through supporting renewable energy and storage projects, including the U.S. Pacific Island Territory, American Samoa. She oversees the development of electric vehicles charged by a variety of renewable energy sources and oversees various innovative grant programs to significantly reduce air pollution through the adoption of innovative technologies. Most recently, Trina serves as the Chief of Staff to the Obama-appointed EPA Regional Administrator, Jared Blumenfeld, advancing the priorities of the agency. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Edna, and we'll get to your questions at the end of the webinar.
Edna, don't forget to unmute.
Aloha and greetings from American Samoa. Again, my name is Edna Noga. I will be, okay, my slide, excuse the slide advancing really quick. Okay, just for ASPA, that stands for American Samoa Power Authority, our mission is to provide quality, safe, sustainable, and economical utility service in partnership with our customers, the community of American Samoa, and the Pacific region. Some general information. We are made up of 4 divisions. Within power, we have generation, transmission, and distribution. We also have our water, wastewater, and our solid waste. We currently have a population of about 55,000, and that's approximately 12,300 customers. For our fiscal year 2016, and for us that's September 2015 to 2016, October 2015 to, yeah. Okay, our peak demand load was 25 megawatts for the 2016, but since the 2017 year started, that's from October to January, we have 26 megawatts. For our diesel generation, it's 167 million kilowatt hours. And for our solar, our PV, it's at about 2.9. I have an asterisk there for 1.7% energy production. That's only using the utility PV system. Okay, some of our for ASPA's total installed PV capacity to date is at 4.24 megawatts. There is an additional 0.7 for our private-owned PV capacity. So in combination, there's approximately 7,400 megawatt hours per year, and that was an estimate for us of 520,000 gallons in avoided diesel consumption. So quickly, our projects that are underway with we have the Tutuila Island PV, our Manua Island, which right now the Ta'u microgrid was commissioned back in October 2016. We have also our Ofu, which is scheduled to be up and running March or April of this year. We also have our waste to energy conversion, our organic Rankine cycle generator, a wind turbine, and also a geothermal investigation. And I'll share the results a little bit later. For the Manua Renewable Energy Initiative, Governor Lolo reestablished the ASREC, which is the American Samoa Renewable Energy Committee, back in 2013. And one of the goals was for 100% renewable energy for Manua by 2016. And for Ta'u, we achieved that in October 2016. For Ofu, again, we are scheduled for the first quarter of this year. The total cost for the Manua Renewable Energy Project is about $11.4 million. For the Ta'u, just some stats for our listeners. 790 is the population per our 2010 census data. We currently have about 231 customers. Our peak load is 280, as you can see. I think we're really excited here that what we have, the PV hybrid, and Tristan will go over the technical aspects of that. We also have 3 275 kilowatt diesel engine and a 480 switchgear that was part of this project. Our estimate savings is about 109,500 gallons, and the total cost for this project was about $8.8 million. For our Ofu and Olosinga project, as you can see, the hybrid system will be consisted of the 342 kilowatt PV and the 1 megawatt hour energy storage. There is plan to add an additional 500 kV for the PV system and an additional 0.5 megawatt hour for the energy storage, making Ofu 100% by the end of this year. The project cost for that is about $2.6 million for the Ofu, bringing the total cost of the Manua project at about $11.4. A little bit for the waste conversion. We did sign a PVA with a contractor. We're still under negotiation for this project, but I wanted to provide an update as far as these are some of the things we're currently working on here. Okay, for wind generation, we had AWS True Power complete a study for us. As you can see on the map, we had 12 different locations. We've identified our village Aloha, which has one of our highest peak, and we will install, we have purchased two 100 kilowatt power turbines, and we are planning to install that this year as well. That is the estimate. It went right back. Okay, for geothermal, we did conduct the research, and our findings last year is right now it is not feasible for American Samoa.
Here, Edna, I can advance the slides for you. It seems like there's a bit of a delay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Oh.
Just
and
let me.
If you have any.
Go ahead, Edna.
Okay. Did I mute it? Oh. All right. And if you need more information, those are some of the websites you can access. For our Manua, our one and only high school in Manua, they did a storyteller with National Geographic with one of our local education research organizations. And you can see the stories of the impact of the solar system through the eyes of 5 seniors in high school. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Edna. Sorry about the slide delay there. We have Tristan up next. Let me get the slides up for you.
Thanks, Sam. Well, hello, this is Tristan Glenwright. I'm Director of Project Development at SolarCity for Microgrid projects. And give me a second, make sure I can advance the slides here. There we go. So this was a great project, a little bit of a repeat of what Edna presented here, but just give you an idea of where in the world American Samoa is and Tau. So off the coast of Australia there, you can see a little dot there, and American Samoa is made up of one larger island and actually I believe 4 smaller islands. The focus of the projects, as she mentioned, were on the Manua Islands, which are 3, one with a land bridge between them. Olasega and Opu has a land bridge between them. Our project focused on Tau Island, and that's what I'll be talking about today. As you can see on the bottom of the screen, that's a good shot of what Tau Island looks like. It has a considerable peak that you can't see behind the clouds there, but just a beautiful, unspoiled tropical island. So this was an RFP that we bid and were awarded and worked in partnership with ASPA. Just to give you some little background on what the requirements were, and it was really to provide the power system for the island, replacing 80% of the diesel use. And another addition to the project later on added some additional energy storage, which would boost that up to around 90%, and there's some energy efficiency programs planned that'll get the island even further closer to 100%. The system would be just interconnected to the existing distribution network, serving the 3 villages on the town. As Edna mentioned, I think she had a little bit updated number, but they have 203 customers or thereabouts on the island. I think total population of around 600. And our scope of work was to supply the materials, build and supervise the installation of what they call the solar PV hybrid system, which includes PV and battery. Again, the original requirement was to hit 80% reduction in diesel. And notice that it mentions supervised, so I'll talk quite a bit about that. This was a capacity building project where we partnered with the utility and trained the local talent there, local skilled laborers, how to build a system of this nature. There's also integration with 3 existing diesel generators. As Edna mentioned, there was later a decision to replace those generators with new ones with a little bit lower power level, but it's just about the same. Peak demand around 229 or so. I think Edna also had a more updated number on that. So when we bid the project, and then after being awarded, we did quite a bit of analysis to understand how we could get to that 80%, how much energy storage would be needed, how much PV would be needed, and you know, there's quite a few challenges there. There are no good ground stations nearby. There is solar data from the existing ASPA sites on the main island. Keep in mind that main island is 70 miles away and does have a little bit different weather patterns. So our approach was to use both in-house and commercial tools to figure out what the economically optimal solution was to hit that goal. And the modeling was all based off of hourly granularity data to achieve the result. And just to give you an idea of what one of these systems looks like when you get to very high levels of renewables, in this chart there's about 5 different categories of energy here. One is renewables delivered via the battery, so that's battery discharging. There's PV being delivered directly. There's PV going into the renewables, and there's, of course, diesel generation to cover the remaining 10% or so. And then we tend to end up with quite a bit of excess PV because the system, to be able to hit those high percentages, has to be sized to go through multiple days of quite cloudy weather where there's lower radiation. So this is an example of a very high production day, very sunny day in February. This is an example of a very low production day, and in cases on a low production day, while it doesn't show it here, the generator would be dispatched in the early morning hours, and that's all automated through a control system that we provided. So the system does do that all autonomously. The final sizing for this system was 1.4 megawatts, 1,400 kilowatts DC of PV with a 4,200 kilowatt hour battery. As I mentioned, that was later expanded up to 6,000 kilowatt hours, and the battery on it has an inverter power of 750 kilowatts, and that's mostly to be able to capture the load. The load is also, capture the PV into the battery, and the PV is also directly serving the load, as I showed in the prior charts. To give you an idea of where this is located, so it's up above a cliff, so we get some protection from the salt spray, but it is still a very hot, humid environment, so significant work had to go into designing the system that would be suitable for the environment. But you can see the site perched up there. We are in the southern hemisphere here, so PV needs to face north, which it does on this site. Some of the key challenges were certainly logistics to the island, capacity building. I'm not sure I would say that's necessarily a challenge. It was actually a great experience for us, and certainly the local labor that was trained up on it. Just general remoteness takes a very long time. You know, there's no Home Depot to run down to. There's no hardware store. You're 70 miles out in the ocean with one flight daily that's usually full and can't carry cargo. So your other alternative is to use a ship, and that ship is often dry docked. So then we resort to some other commercial vessels, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute, to get materials out there. And if you forget something, it's going to take a few days to get it out there. Weather, anywhere in the South Pacific, you have some pretty extreme weather, particularly with climate change. So we will experience that through the project. And then, you know, American Samoa, while it is American territory, the people are Samoan. They do, most of them speak English, but particularly out on the outer islands, they also speak their native language, and that's, you know, their primary language. And then there's cultural sensitivities. You know, we're bringing in some work crews and so forth, so into an area that's very remote, communal-based, very religious, and so we trained our work crews on how to respect that, the local cultural, and that actually worked out very well. They're very well embraced by the community, and so that was all good there. So just to give you an idea, I talked about logistics a little bit, but being 70 miles out in the ocean is a challenge, particularly when you've got inclement weather coming in. The boat down in the bottom left is the government boat, which was dry docked at least 5 times during the project, so it could not operate. And then you see a little picture of about the size of the plane that comes, not quite, I think it's 6 days a week now, but once a day, and as I mentioned, it's usually booked, so you can't just hop on a plane the next day. So some of the alternate transportation that was used, some cases we used a sailing ship to get materials on the island when the main boat was dry docked. American Samoa is going to receive a new replacement boat for that government boat, and that will be very welcome for the residents and certainly other projects like this, or maybe not like this, but other projects on the island to come. And as we mentioned, you know, cyclones continue, you know, through the season, which is why we were constructing the project. So constant vigilance, watching where those storms are moving, particularly when you're moving materials on vessels across the ocean. You need to be very careful about that. And we work very carefully with ASPA and those vessel operators to ensure safety. And then the crazy weather, you know, when you get torrential rains, you end up with some lost work days, very unproductive work days. But overall, the project was completed on schedule, and with a lot of help from as I mentioned, the local staff on the island. Just to, again, mention general remoteness. If a piece of equipment fails out there, you have to get innovative on how to fix it. You don't have a repair shop. So in this case, we had to lose a track there, and through local technique, let me call it that, we were able to get that machine back functioning and put back to work. Integration challenges, as we mentioned, the generators were replaced. When we surveyed the existing switchgear and generators, they were not in great condition. And I'm pretty old, but I think they were a bit older than I am. So so it is a welcome change to go ahead and replace that. Now, with a very high renewable percentage project, you might ask, why would you invest in that cost? Well, you still need to provide reliable power and also be in a prepared state in case there is a storm. The diesel plant is in a separate part of the island from the renewable plant. So if a storm does come in and take one of those out, the other can serve the load until emergency preparations are put in place. The electrical distribution system on the island is a 3-phase system at the main power plant, but then they branch phases off to serve different parts of the island. and it is not balanced. So we had some challenges there, but we're able to work through them with partnering with ASPA. When we get to these systems where the diesels are completely off and the battery system is the power source for the island, we also get into a situation where we need to look at the protection systems on the island, and the low amount of fault current that's typically delivered by power electronics is far less than diesels, and so we had to come up with a scheme there, which we did, and work with ASPA's engineers on that to validate it. As I mentioned, we did train local staff there. We brought in training teams that we use to train our own crew when we hire new crews. So they were deployed on site out there and trained the local workers on how to install a solar system, which went quite well. Very rewarding, fulfilling experience for both us and those folks. And just some other complications. You know, you're on a volcanic island, so you only go down a few feet before you hit solid rock. And so then you have to either break through that rock or drill through it to get the PV foundations in, because we're also dealing with potential 170-mile-per-hour winds. And those of you who worked in the PV industry, you know that the PV array acts as like a big sail under those wind conditions. So foundations had to be designed and installed to support those kind of wind loads. And then, of course, everything there is hot dip galvanized to stand up to the harsh environment. Here's just a view of the completed system. So you can see PV on both sides of the road. The white boxes you see in the foreground towards the bottom are the battery systems. So there's like 3 rows of 2 each there, and then there's a little control house right behind them. And just a beautiful, beautiful island, a little bit uncomfortable to work during most seasons because it's hot and humid, but certainly just a fantastic experience for our teams that were out there. That's the end of my presentation.
Thanks, Tristan. We have Trina up next.
Great, thanks. As you're pulling up the slides, I'll introduce myself. I'm Trina Martynowicz with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I'm out of our Pacific Southwest Region 9 office. I'm actually based in San Francisco, but we oversee California, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and the Pacific Island territories. Besides the American Samoa, those islands include Guam and the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas Islands. I would be remiss if I did not recognize our fellow federal agency and quasi-agencies who helped make the American Samoa Ta'u project happen. The National Renewable Energy Lab provided various reports and studies and really laid the groundwork for identifying various renewable opportunities around and at American Samoa. The Department of Interior's Office of Insular Affairs actually provides federal funding to help run those local governments and provided a grant to American Samoa for the PV and storage project. And then EPA provided actually 2 different grants for 2 different PV storage projects on 2 different islands in American Samoa under the Diesel Emission Reduction Act program, or DERA. This program provides grants to go above and beyond existing regulations to reduce diesel emissions by siting new, modified, or retrofitted cleaner diesel equipment or in vehicles. And EPA's 2 DERA grants to the American Samoa Power Authority are for replacing those highly polluting diesel generators, which both Edna and Tristan spoke about, downsizing them with cleaner systems, and then of course along with the solar and battery storage system. And as you can see, the air emissions from these two combined projects is actually quite significant, as well as the annual gallons of diesel reduced each year. The Diesel Emission Reduction Act program is run out of EPA's Clean Diesel program, which provides technical assistance, grants, and rebates to support projects that reduce harmful air emissions from diesel. Why do we care about diesel emissions? Exposure to diesel exhaust can lead to serious health conditions like asthma and respiratory illnesses. It can worsen existing heart and lung disease, especially for susceptible populations such as children and the elderly, and those who are living near major diesel emission sources such as highways, ports, rail yards, and diesel-generated power plants. Emissions from diesel engines contributes to the production of ground-level ozone or smog, acid rain, reductions in visibility, and of course climate change, primarily from emitting CO2 and black carbon. Diesel emission reductions improve air quality, thus benefiting human health and the environment, while in our case with American Samoa, providing price certainty and a reduced dependence on foreign oil. So how is EPA's DERA program structured? Last year, 2016, the DERA program provided $50 million generally in grants throughout the nation for these various programs. I've also included URLs at the end of my PowerPoint presentation for all the projects and programs I'm going to talk about today for future reference. So the DERA national program is made up of around 75% of the total funding, which includes 3 separate programs under it. The national and tribal program provides funding to state, local, and tribal governments and nonprofits for reducing diesel emissions from a variety of diesel engine types or sources, which I'll cover in my next slide. The rebate program, on the other hand, is a streamlined program that provides funding for cleaner school buses. And then the state and U.S. territory allocation is what was funded to American Samoa for the 2 different microgrid projects. This money is automatic block grant funds, or as I call it, kind of free money to the states and U.S. territories. And the West Coast Collaborative is actually the EPA program that I work under, which oversees the regional DERA funding throughout the western U.S., of course, including the American Samoa and other Pacific Island territories. And as I mentioned, please just note that these dollar amounts listed on this slide were from fiscal year 2016. As you probably are aware, Congress has not yet provided EPA's entire budget for this current fiscal year, but hope to have similar amounts, hopefully, this year. And we anticipate releasing the national RFP, so in last year, the $27 million RFP, perhaps as early as next week. And stay tuned, the President may have additional announcements under this program. So who's eligible to apply for DERA? Governments, tribes, and nonprofits, or they could provide subgrants directly to private entities, such as FedEx, which received money to partially pay for the purchase of this fully battery electric delivery truck. Most of the DERA grant programs historically have been for on- and off-road vehicles, such as medium and heavy-duty trucks and buses, city buses, trains, and construction equipment. However, as you saw with the 2 American Samoa grants, we're also able to fund cleaner energy sources, once again by ensuring diesel emission reductions. So in our case, reducing diesel through the retirement of an old diesel generators, and then replacing it with cleaner, smaller systems, as well as the solar PV and storage. All of the old diesel equipment or vehicles must be scrapped or rendered inoperable and then replaced with newer, less polluting equipment, such as cleaner diesel engines, hybrid electric systems, or alt-fuel vehicles, such as renewable natural gas that could be generated from food waste through anaerobic digestion, which is the photo on the bottom, which is a refuse truck out of Sacramento. And of course, we could fund fully electric zero-emission systems. Fuel cells, I should mention, both for stationary energy generation as well as vehicles, are also eligible for DERA funding, once again, just as long as they're reducing diesel emissions. And I'd like to also just note that the Volkswagen partial consent decree may include funding similar to the DERA program, which I just discussed. The VW Environmental Mitigation Trust includes $2.7 billion to reduce oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, throughout the U.S. Each of the 50 states of the U.S., D.C., Puerto Rico, and tribes may be beneficiaries of these funds. So one option under the eligible mitigation actions is the DERA option, similar, as I mentioned, to the DERA program. California, you should be aware, will have their own separate process under this consent decree, as they're going to be receiving $1.2 billion to award emission reduction activities just for California. For key next steps in the VW consent decree is to identify the trustee who will manage these funds, which may be decided in the next month or so. And I should just note, I'm unfortunately not able to answer any questions about this settlement, but you could find more information on both the EPA and California Air Resources Board websites. So EPA runs a few other programs that support renewables. The Repowering America's Lands initiative encourages renewable energy development on disturbed or underutilized sites, such as brownfields or abandoned parcels. The initiative identifies renewable energy potential of these sites and provides other useful resources for pretty much anyone who's interested in reusing these sites for renewable energy development. So for example, we have a variety of tools, one of which is a mapping and the other a screening tool. The mapper includes over 80,000 pre-screened sites for solar, wind, biomass, or geothermal potential. And the screening tool provides additional site data, of course, to the extent it's available, on a given site size, as well as distance to a substation or transmission lines, among many other helpful data sets. The initiative also provides webinars and case studies and technical assistance on siting renewables on these disturbed or contaminated lands. I would also be remiss if I did not mention what I see as the lowest of low-hanging fruit, or fruit on the ground, for energy systems, energy efficiency, and of course the Energy Star program. For those developers or folks that are thinking of installing systems, please make sure you're at least benchmarking and then reducing your energy use first, well before speccing these new systems. So as you're probably aware, the Energy Star program certifies residential, commercial, and industrial products and buildings. It benchmarks buildings on energy, water, and most recently there's a new waste tool for option under the portfolio manager, and then also various education and outreach materials, as well as specific training on how to use portfolio manager. Other EPA programs around renewables include the Green Power Partnership, which provides technical assistance and recognition for partners that use renewable energy for all or portions of electricity there on site. EPA is currently providing information also on climate and energy resources for state and local tribal governments in a variety of areas, which include renewables. And then the Desire website, which I actually reference quite often, is a pretty extensive list of federal, state, and local policies and incentives throughout the U.S., both for energy efficiency as well as renewables. So as far as next steps, EPA is working with American Samoa and the broader Pacific Island territories to deploy electric vehicles there on islands. Of course, being charged with renewables and ideally energy storage with these renewable systems allows these vehicles to drive on 100% fossil-free energy, being fully independent of petroleum and providing significant cost savings to its residents. So thank you for joining the webinar. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Tristan and Edna, and Seth and Sam for hosting us. My contact information is here. I'm happy to connect you with my other EPA colleagues if they're outside of my region. And then, as I mentioned, a variety of URLs for the programs that I mentioned. I should also note that each of these programs has individual newsletters or listservs. So I encourage you, if you'd like to keep up to date with these variety of programs, you could sign up on these sites. So thank you, folks, and I think now we're going to turn it over for Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much, Trina and Tristan and Edna. We have a lot of questions, so I apologize in advance for those of you that we don't get to your questions. I'm going to try to stick to stuff that's pretty specifically focused on the project, and I encourage all of you to reach out to the folks on the webinar today if you have additional questions that don't get answered. So to start off, we had a few different questions. about the financing of the project, the ownership structure, whether this was done under a PPA arrangement. So this question, I guess, goes to either Edna or Tristan, or maybe both of you could weigh in on this, just how the actual economics and financing of the project went outside of the grants that that Trina told us about.
Yeah, Seth, I think it would be appropriate for Edna to answer that question. It's their project.
All right. So for the project, for TAU, the total cost was $8.8 million. As far as for the funding, we did receive funding from EPA, the Department of Interior, and then also our local ASEDA, which is American Samoa Economic Development, and ASPA. So those were the sources for the fund. And there is no PPA. That one is actually, it's owned by ASPA. And so there are some conversations for future, but at this time, it's owned by ASPA.
Great. And you know, I'm curious, can you speak at all to the levelized cost of energy from the system versus the diesel generation?
I don't have the specifics on that, but I can get that information out, and I'll include it in my presentation.
Okay. I'm sure people would be very interested to learn that. So, Tristan, some questions on the sizing of the battery system. Just what considerations were taken into account for the sizing of the system? Was it to make sure there was a certain number of days or a certain amount of solar could be stored? Someone also did a little bit of math, and they were wondering, with the output of the solar system being, I believe, 1.4 megawatts, and the storage being less than a megawatt, even with the total peak demand, there could be times when there still could be over-generation. Just wondering if that is the case.
Yeah, so let's see. So the system is sized using optimization algorithms that and modeling algorithms that take into account the amount of solar radiance at that site, which is based on an hourly model for a year, and that's typically referred to as a typical meteorological year. So that's the data set that was used. And that goes through a modeling algorithm. We used Homer Pro to do the initial modeling on this system. And then we used some in-house tools to take into account losses and things that Homer Pro doesn't understand because it doesn't understand the physical topology of the project. So that's how the storage and PV were sized. To the calculation, that PV number is a DC number. The AC number is around a little bit over a megawatt of PV. Now, you might say, okay, that's still in excess of the batteries and the potential load on the island, and that is true. And if you notice on one of my charts, on a high production day, there's quite a bit of PV curtailment that's going on. And we've been working with ASPA to look at ways to use that. It's not a constant source. You'll get some days where there's considerable overgeneration. You'll get some days where there isn't any overgeneration, and then you'll get some days where, of course, the battery has to carry the system through those days until we get a solar resource back.
Great. Has there been, I'm curious if there's been any consideration with the excess generation of transportation, of looking into more EVs off of the island?
There has been some discussion on that. In fact, Trina just on her slides mentioned that there is a look at EV program. For this island in particular, the ideal vehicle would be like a little pickup truck, which there aren't too many of those commercially available yet, so it may be just a matter of technology or the availability of those type of vehicles to become prevalent and economic.
Yeah, that's very
The other
interesting.
comment there is that, the vehicles, it is a small island, so as long as the vehicles had pretty substantial range, they'd be an excellent, way to use that excess generation.
Great. Again, for you, Tristan, there are some questions about just the reliability of the system, some questions about how the fault protection works, and what's being done to keep frequency maintained. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So I'll start with the frequency. The battery system and the power electronics integrated with the battery system is the primary frequency source and voltage source on the island when the diesels are off, which is most of the time. In terms of reliability, this is a very high reliable energy storage system, and we're seeing that in the numbers. As it has entered several months of service now, we're seeing very, very high reliability, and there are redundancies built into the system. For example, the PV system uses string inverters. So at any time, if we have a string inverter or two, I think there's a total of 44 of them, it's not a significant impact to the total production of the system.
Great.
Can I add a little bit?
Yeah.
Just looking at our December and January numbers, for December it was 82% renewable and, of course, 18% on diesel. But for January, we had 98% from the renewable, from the solar plant versus the 2 on the, and that was mainly for maintenance and some testing.
That's great. That was actually going to be my next question. So thank you, Edna, for getting ahead of that. An interesting question we had here, just about another solar and storage system that was installed in actually in the Samoan Islands in 2008 on the island of Apalima. There was a question: if that project was looked at for this, and if that system is working well, and if the lessons from it were applied to the Ta'u project and the Ofu project. So is anyone familiar with that, and if that was used as a case study for this?
Seth, can you say the name of the island again?
Apalima.
Apalima. That was not one of the case studies we used. There are other islands in the Pacific that we did look at. There's been a prevalence of lead-acid storage used on those systems, which has a very short life. So the systems tend to perform maybe well in the beginning, but after 3 years, the batteries start to become depleted, and then the projects, run into tough times because there isn't the funding there to then replace the batteries. Versus in this case, the batteries are a 10-year battery system, completely sealed, lithium-ion technology. There's very, very low maintenance on them, and will deliver reliable power for 10 years.
That's great. You guys keep answering other questions that I have. I was going to ask about the lifetime of the batteries. You also had a question about the lifetime of the solar panels, just in this environment. What does the lifespan of the panels look like, and at what level of performance degradation do you look at replacing the panels?
Yeah, so the panels are specifically selected to be suitable for a high salt, high wind environment. The panels should have a life of at least 20 years, more likely 30 years. Some of the very early solar panels that have been deployed, even in the U.S., are still in operation, far exceeding their life expectancy. Certainly this environment, hot, humid environment, contributes to the service life of the equipment. but we would expect that they would exceed probably a 20-year life. And manufacturer's degradation warranty is typically, I don't recall exactly for these modules, but typically between 0.7% to 1% a year. And there is a degradation warranty on the modules as well. The modules would, not likely be replaced until end of their useful life. What ASPA may decide to do in the future is build out a little bit more PV to counteract the degradation of the PV. But that's many years down the road before it would be economically practical to do that.
Yeah, great, thank you. Edna, a question for you about the OFU system. Some folks were wondering who's developing that system, and if you have any information about the details of what that's going to look like.
Yes, for the OFU system, I'm not sure if it was on the slide. So it'll be a 342 for the solar, and then the 1 megawatt for the battery storage, if that's what you're asking for. And then also there's plan later on in the year to install an additional 500 and 0.5 megawatts storage.
Great. And do you have a developer set up for that project yet? Oh.
The developer, local company or here in the Pacific called PSI.
Mm-hmm.
And we're almost done. The scheduled commission date is for March or April of this year. So they're now just finishing up the battery racking and everything in the facility. So we're almost there, but those are some of the details.
Great. Looking forward to hearing more about that. And so, Trina, I'm going to throw a question your way. There was a question about the DERA grant, and if a for-profit company can qualify for the grant as well.
No, so all of the DERA grant programs that I mentioned are only eligible for government agencies or nonprofits that have a substantial involvement in air quality issues or tribes to apply. So private sectors are not eligible to apply. However, you are able to work with your local government agency, and they could apply and then sub-grant part or all of the DERA grant funds to you. So the competitive program, as I mentioned, the RFP is perhaps coming out as early as next week, should be open for about 60 days or so. And so that RFP and past RFPs are on our DERA website too, could allow companies to help secure those funds.
Great. So we're just about, we are out of time. I'm going to do one more question because federal tax credits, which people are always interested about, I'm guessing this probably goes to Edna. Were tax credits, the federal tax incentives, used in this project since it is storage combined with solar? Was it used for just the solar portion, for both the solar and the batteries, or not at all?
So I'll look to Tristan actually and Tracy for support on this one. I have not heard anything regarding this particular project, but we have several that we're talking about, so I don't want to give you the wrong information.
Great.
Yeah, and this was an EPC to us, so we did not finance it. Normally, if we did finance it, we would leverage ITC. So, Ed, I'm not sure if you all are going to be able to take advantage of the tax credits or not. So maybe that's something that can be followed up on, but it's not something that we're able to take advantage of because it's an EPC project.
Great. Okay. Well, I want to thank you guys once again for this. This has been really interesting, and I apologize to all the folks that I didn't get to your questions. Please reach out to either us here at Clean Energy Group or these folks directly. Edna, Tristan, and Trina, thank you so much for joining us today. Look forward to seeing how this project performs over time and more projects as they develop. So thank you very much.